How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Vav, Daf 106 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, Daf 106, Mamish Givaldig. We discuss, the first part is a very shtickle that we technically, I guess, could have done yesterday, but it would, whatever. Why minchas nesachim is excluded from the safek, right? Yesterday we were talking about if you said you're going to bring a type of a mincha, you don't remember which type, so you bring one of each type. So what are those types? Minchas solis, minchas marcheshes, machvas, maifesoner chalas, and rakikin. Now, what about minchas nesachim? So we'll discuss why minchas nesachim is not included in that list. We will discuss when a number of issarons is specified for a vessel. So that was the machlekes in the Mishnah between the Chachamim and Rebbe. If you remember, Rebbe's shita was you have to bring 60 vessels, and each vessel has one more issaron than the previous. So the first vessel has one issaron, the second vessel has two issarons, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to the final vessel has 60 issarons in it. Whereas the Chacham said just bring one vessel filled with 60 issarons. That's the ganze Zach. So basically that's kind of the big part of today's daf is understanding, analyzing the machlekes between the Chacham and Rebbe, why they hold their respective opinions. Then we get to a new Mishnah discussing donating wood, frankincense, and metals like gold, silver, copper, iron. Friends, let's jump in and enjoy Daf Vav, Daf 106 of Masechta Menachos. We won't have so many more opportunities to enjoy Masechta Menachos. After this, there's only 4 more opportunities. Daf Zayin, Ches, Tes, and finally Daf Yud. Friends, Daf Vav of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we begin on Daf Vav of Masechta Menachos. About 8 or so lines into Daf Vav. Omar Le Rav Kahana Le Rav Ashi, says Rav Kahana to Rav Ashi. I imagine this is probably the younger Rav Kahana who lived around Rav Ashi's time. I think he was Rav Ashi's Rebbe, actually. What about, so here Rav Kahana is asking Rav Ashi a question, but anyways, I don't know. I don't exactly know that relationship so good. Anyways, Rav Kahana asks Rav Ashi, what about minchas nesachim? As I mentioned in the introduction, the 5 types of minachas that we are unsure if he was referring to when he says, I pledged a type of mincha and I don't remember which type. We said those 5 are minchas soles, minchas machvas, minchas marcheshes, minchas maifesoner chalos, minchas maifesoner rakikim. Absent from that list is minchas nesachim. We did, after all, say, are we going to mention it? Yeah, the Amar Rav, after all, Rav said, Misnadev adam minchas nesachim b'chel yem. A person, if he wants to, can pledge a minchas nesachim. Flour, oil, wine, and all of that will be offered on the altar. So maybe that is what he had pledged. What he's the Gemara answers what he is uncertain about, and we're going to have several of these. Ba biglal yochid, ba biglal tzibur, lo mistapka lei. He is only what he would have specified is a korban that is brought exclusively by individuals, whereas minchas nesachim is, of course, associated not just with individual korbanos, but also with public, communal korbanos. So those we exclude from the list. Additionally, the concern is only about minachas that come on their own, like a minchas machvas, let's say. You bring a minchas machvas, it's not connected to any other korban, whereas minchas nesachim is connected to a korban, right? You bring it along with the shlamim or whatever. It comes together with a korban. Ki kab mistapkale tuna livona she'ena tuna livona lo mistapkale. He would have only specified a mincha that has livona offered with it. Minchas nesachim does not have livona, is not offered together with livona. Kika mistapka le, ba bilog, ba bishlosha lugin lo mistapka le. he is only considering minachos that are brought with one log of oil, not minachos like minchas nesachim that are brought with 3 or 4 or 6 logs of oil. Kika mistap galei tuna kmitza she'ena tuna kmitza lo ka mistap galei, and finally he's only considering it's only besafek about a mincha that is kometz, a mincha that is not kometz, such as minchas nesachim, he is not considering. Okay, so for all those reasons, that is why minchas nesachim was not under consideration. And now we begin discussing the main sugya of today's daf, and that is when a person says, hey, I pledged a certain number of issarons to offer in a vessel. I don't remember what that number is. According to the Chachamim, he brings one vessel with 60 issarons. That's the maximum that can fit in one vessel, as we know, because that's the maximum for mixing with one log of oil. And so he brings one vessel with 60 issarons. The question is, what exactly does that accomplish? Okay, how do we view it? Let's say in fact he had said he's going to bring 3 issarons. Now he brings 60 issarons. So 3 is going to be for his chova. What about the rest? Is it chulin? Is it a nedava? What happens? That's going to be the big discussion. The kind of part of the big discussion will be how we view this vessel, where he's kind of bringing the maximum amount with an understanding that there's a high likelihood that what he pledged was actually less than that. So anyways, that is according to Chum. According to Rebbe, he must bring 60 individual korban minachos in 60 separate vessels, and each vessel has one more issaron than the vessel before it, starting with 1 issaron, then the next one has 2 issarons, then 3 issarons, 4 issarons, etc. Okay. Now we shall discuss this machloikes. Says the Gemara, Perashti mincha shel issronim. Right, so a person says, I had specified a mincha of a certain amount of issarons to be brought in a vessel, and I can't remember what that number is. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis, ta perashti mincha. Okay, you got to kind of wiggle around the words shel issronim. So I defined a mincha of a certain number of issarons. V'kavaiti b'kli echad, and I had said that I'm going to bring that number of issarons in one vessel. Ve'eni yodea ma perashti, but I cannot remember what that number was. What was the number that I defined? Yavi mincha shel shishim issronim divrei chacham. So the chacham say the solution is bring one korban mincha in one vessel. That vessel will contain 60 issarons, and problem solved. Rebbe says, Yavi minachos shel esronim. Rebbe says you have to bring 60 minachos. Me echad ve'ad shishin. Bring 60 minachos, and as we've said, each mincha, each vessel will have one more issaron than the previous, beginning with 1 issaron in the first vessel and ending with 60 esronim in the final one. Shehein elef v'shmona meos v'shloshim, that are a total of 1,830 issarons. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, etc., plus 60 ultimately equals 1,830. Interestingly, as I was learning this, I was kind of wondering, how do I confirm that? How do you arrive at 1,830? Do you literally have to do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus... Right? If you wanted to solve this math problem, what would you do? So I did what you may have done, which is I just opened up my Google browser and I typed, what is the result of 1 plus 2 plus 3, etc., up to and including 60, question mark, enter, and it said 1,830. But if you couldn't do that, how would you go about solving this problem? Do you literally have to do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4? What did they do in the time of the Gemara, where even if that was what you're doing, you couldn't write a computer script, or you couldn't have a calculator to help you? Did you literally have to sit there in your mind? Tosfos has a very creative solution. Very, very interesting. Tosfos says that, they say certain of the great rabbis in our history, didn't study math necessarily in universities, but they were math geniuses because of Tosfos. Here's an example of Tosfos giving us an interesting mathematical solution, which is when you have a formula, when you have a math problem of this type, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, up until any number, what you do is, so in our case, it's 60, right? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, etc., until 60. So what you do is, actually, if you take 1 and 60 and add them together, it's 61. If you take 2 and 59 and add them together, it's also 61. 3 and 58, 4 and 57, 5 and 56, etc., they will all equal 61. And if you keep on doing that until you get to the middle of the numbers, which is 30 and 31, which will also equal 61, then you're basically done. And essentially what you've done is you've equaled 61 30 times, essentially. In other words, the mathematical thing that you can do in this scenario is you basically, essentially what you're doing is you're adding 1, right? So 60 plus 1 is 61. And then you're dividing it by half, which is 30. So essentially what you're doing is, right, you're going to keep on adding these two numbers, which are always going to add up to 61 until you meet in the middle and there's no more numbers to work with. And you add those all together, which is going to be 61 times 30, and it's going to equal 1,830. So instead of doing 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, which is a lot of work, basically what you could do ultimately is 61 times 30, which is 1,830. Super interesting. So Tosfos gives us a solution for that. He says you can also apply it, for example, on Sukkot. And Sukkot, on the first day of Sukkot, you have 13 cows, and then second day, 12 cows, 11 cows, right? Until on the final day, there's 7. So if you want to figure out how many cows that is, you would do the same thing. 7 and 3 is 20, 8 and 12 is 20, etc. And then and then basically you would do the math that way. Anyways, very interesting mathematical solution there from Tosfos. Now, Perashti ve'eni yodea ma perashti. Okay, I think there's some skipped words over here. Perashti ve'eni yodea ezo mehen perashti ve'eni yodea kama perashti. If he says, I had specified a neder, but I don't remember how many issarons, but I also don't remember what type of a mincha I had specified. Well, in this case, not only do you have to bring one vessel with 60 issarons according to the Chacham, you have to do that for each of the 5 types of minchas, because you specified one, you don't remember which one. So yavi chamesh menachos, bring 5 menachos shel shishim with 60 issarons in each, according to the rabbis, with shishim esronim shein shlosh meos devechacham, which is 5 times 60, which is 300. That is the opinion of the rabbis. According to Rebbe, you're going to have to do 1,830 times 5, which is 9,150. Rebbe almost says, Rebbe yavi chamesh menachos shall, skip the next word, esronim me echad vad shishim, bring 5 minchas of these 60 vessels with one, each one having one more than the previous, which is essentially 1,830 times 5, shein tisha alafim 9,150 and 150. Okay, gevaldik. Now we're going to start discussing what exactly is the reason for their argument. What do they argue about? Why do the Chacham say bring one vessel with 60 issarons, and Rebbe says bring 60 vessels with the incrementing issarons? Rav Chizde says, Rav Chizde. So before I read this, I want to preface this with according to this view, both Rav Chizde and Rebbe agree that one vessel cannot contain both a neder obligated in a chova in obligated mincha, and a nedava, a voluntary mincha. Meaning that, let's say, so remember, you said you're going to bring a mincha in a vessel. You don't remember. It could have been 1, it could have been 10, it could have been 60. Let's say it was 3. Let's say it turns out it was 3. But he doesn't remember that, so he's bringing 60. So to say that, well, he'll make a tanai and say that the number, whatever the number is that I had said, it was 3. So we'll say that those 3 will be a neder, an obligatory mincha, and the rest will be a nedava, a voluntary mincha. according to Rav Chizda, both Rabbi and the Chacham agree you can't do that. You can't have both a neder and a nedava, an obligation and a voluntation, an obligatory and a voluntary mincha in one vessel. That is not a possibility. So now, what are they arguing about? So says Rav Chizda, look, they both agree that one vessel cannot contain both an obligatory and a voluntary mincha. Now, so the question is it permitted to bring chulin into the azara? Rabbi Savar also lachnis chulin lazar, Rabbanan Savi mutter lachnis chulin lazar. Rabbi says also the Chacham say mutter, meaning, well, the way that we're viewing it is thus: according to the Chacham, you have one vessel, and in that vessel there are 60 issarons. Now, let's just say, remember, he doesn't remember. Let's just agree on this right now that we don't have to explain it every time. He doesn't remember how many issarons he had pledged. As an example, he doesn't know this, but this is our secret. What he pledged, in fact, was 3 issarons, but he doesn't remember that. But let's work with that example. So I'll use 3 as the example of the amount that he actually needs to be bringing, even though he doesn't know that. Therefore, he has to deal with more possibilities. So the fact of the matter is he pledged 3 issarons. So the Chachamim say, okay, what we'll do is bring one vessel, 60 issarons in the vessel. Now he'll make a tonight. He'll say the number of issarons that I had committed to, which is 3. So those will be my korban mincha. Here are 60 issarons, but 3 of them will be my korban mincha, and the rest of it will be chulin. Won't be a korban mincha. So here's this whole vessel. Just the number that I need to be offering is going to be considered the offering, and the rest will just be chulin. Now Rebbe says you can't do that because you can't bring chulin into the azara, so that's a non-starter. And therefore, instead, what you do is you'll bring 60 vessels. Each vessel has a different number of issarons in it, and that way, one of them will have 3 issarons, which is the correct amount, and all the other ones we can view as nidavas. Now, Rebbe can't suggest, well, why don't you just bring it in one vessel and view the 3 as an obligation and the rest as a voluntary? Because, as we said, everyone agrees you can't have an obligation and a voluntary nidava in one, a voluntary mincha in one vessel. They both agree that that's not a possibility. But to bring 60 vessels, each with a different number, one of them will be the correct one, and that will be the obligatory offering, and all of the other 59 will be considered voluntary offerings. That's completely fine, so long as they're all separate offerings. Okay? So again, Rebbe Savar also lachnis chulin lazar. Rebbe says you can't bring chulin into the azar. So to say that bring one vessel and 3 of them will be an obligation and the rest of them will be voluntary in the same vessel, that's not an option. For Rabbanan Savi mutar lachnis chulin lazar, the Rabbanan say that's fine. You can say that 3 of the 60 will be for the mincha and the rest will just be chulin. That's fine according to the Rabbanan. Rave. Now Tosfos changes Rave to Rabba because we're going to see Rave later on. So Tosfos says it's not Rave, this is Rabba. Omar, D'chulei Alma also lachnis chulin lazar. Rabba says that everyone agrees that you are not allowed to bring chulin into the azara, and the Chachamim agree with that as well. You can't just say that 3 as issarons will be the mincha and the rest will be chulin. You can't bring chulin into the azara, says Rabba. Rather here, the machlaikes is what I had said up until now. Everyone agreed was off limits. Actually, that's punkt the machlaikes. Can you have a vessel, one vessel that contains both in obligatory mincha as well as a voluntary mincha in the same vessel, to say that 3 issarons will be for a obligatory mincha and the rest of the 57 issarons will be for a voluntary mincha, right? Obligatory mincha or a voluntary mincha. Rabbanan Sabri mutar la'ariv chova b'nedava. The rabbis say that's fine. You can have one vessel that has both an obligatory mincha and a voluntary mincha. The Rebbe Sover also la'ariv chova b'nedava. Whereas Rebbe says you can't do that. You can't have one vessel with both a obligatory and voluntary mincha in there. He also says you can't bring chulin into the hazara, and therefore you have to have 60, meaning they both agree you can't have chulin in the hazara. Therefore, you have to bring 60 individual menachos. So Abaye says to Rabba, L'Rabonon de Amre mutu la'arev chova b'nedava. So Abaye asks a technical question, a very important technical question in terms of, okay, how does this work out in practice? Okay, so Rabbi, you're saying that according to the rabbis, you can have one vessel. 3 of the issarons will be an obligatory mincha. The rest of the 57 will be a voluntary mincha. Now, both of those menachos, you're going to have to burn a kometz, right? So you're going to have to take a kometz from the vessel. Right? A kometz is going to have to be taken from the vessel and burnt for the obligatory mincha. Another kometz is going to have to be taken from the vessel for the 57 issarons of the voluntary vessel, mincha. So, haba inon shnei kmatzim. But, so how does this work? It says Abaye, because aren't you going to need 2 kometzes? The kometz, the other kometz. To which Rabbi says, yeah, okay, so, yeah, 2 kometzes, that's exactly correct. You'll take 1 kometz, followed by another kometz. One will be for the obligatory mincha, the other will be for the voluntary mincha. V'aka kometz mechova anadava minadava achova. But one second, but when he takes each of the kometzes, that kometz is going to contain both, right? You're just taking a fistful from the vessel. That fistful is going to contain part obligatory mincha and part voluntary mincha. Both of those kometz are going to be a mixture of both. The tali lebedas koin. Well, he leaves it up to the koin. The owner of the mincha leaves it up to the koin to determine b'shas ma'aseh what's what. I.e., the Omer that he says, Kol eicha dematya yoda de koin, hashta chova l'vasof nidava. Whatever the koin is going to take as the first kometz, and whatever portion of the mincha he's kometzing first, that will be the obligatory portion of the mincha, and the whatever he kometzes after that will be from the voluntary portion of the mincha. Okay, fine. That sounds good to me. Now what? So he's taken 2 separate kometzes, right? The kohen takes 1 kometz for the chova, the obligatory, and he takes another kometz for the nidava, for the voluntary. But now how does he, in practice, burn the kometzes? The kata nidava beresha? Well, let's see. What happens if he were to first burn the nidava, the kometz of the nidava, of the voluntary mincha? You see, the problem with that is that the owner of the mincha, let's call him Ruvain. Ruvain doesn't know how many issarons he specified, right? I've been using as an example 3. What if it wasn't 3? What if it was 60? He doesn't remember. What if, in fact, he said that he's going to bring 60 issarons? Well, if that's the case, then there is no voluntary portion of the mincha. It's actually entirely what he's obligated to be bringing. Now, there's a halacha that we've learned in the past, which is that if the shirayim of a mincha go missing, if any part of the shirayim of a mincha go missing, you don't burn the kometz anymore. So once he separates that kometz, so the rest of whatever's left in the bowl is the shiarei mincha, is the shirayim. Now when he takes that second kometz for the quote-unquote voluntary mincha, and then he burns that kometz on the mizbeach, the voluntary kometz first, that kometz is gone. Now, if he in fact had committed to bring 60 issarons, well, then he needs all of what was left over from the first komets, when he took the first komets for his obligatory offering. Everything that was left in the bowl, all 60 issarons minus the komets that he took, is the shirayim of the obligatory mincha. And that needs to remain complete. When he then takes another komets for the voluntary mincha and burns it on the mizbeach, if in fact what he had pledged was all 60 issarons, well, he can no longer burn the komets for the obligatory offering, which is the entire 60 issarons, because the shirayim are now missing the flour that was burnt as the komets for what he was considering to be the voluntary offering, which was in fact really just part of the obligatory offering. Right? So back in the Gemara, Heichi Mekater, how is he going to in practice burn these kometses? The obligatory komets, the voluntary komets, Likater Nadav Bereisha, if he's first going to burn the voluntary komets, Dichova Eichi Mikatela, how would he then be able to then go ahead and burn the obligatory komets? Because Dilma Kula Chovahi, what if what he in fact had pledged was all 60 issarons, in which case all of the content of the vessel, all of the flour, was his chova, was his obligatory mincha. V'chasulu shirayin, and by burning what he was considering to be the voluntary komets first, that means that the shirayim of the obligatory komets mincha is lacking. The Amar we said shirayim shechasu ben kmitza l'aktorah, that when the shirayim become lacking to any extent between when the komets of a mincha is komets and when it's burned, such as here, you had separated the obligatory komets and then you had taken another komets which you shouldn't have and burnt it, which means that the shirayim are missing. Ein maktir are lacking. Ein maktir komets alein. You wouldn't proceed to burn the komets anymore. So how can you be burning the obligatory komets when there's a possibility that the shirayim are currently lacking? So okay. So what if what you do is you first burn the obligatory komets? Okay, so you separate the obligatory komets, and either you burn it right away, or you can, maybe even separate the voluntary komets as well, but just don't burn it, and then you burn the obligatory komets. Okay, fine, you separated the obligatory komets, you burnt it, all the shirayim were still intact at the time, even if you had pledged to bring all 60 issarons, the first komets seems to be fine. And it is. The problem now becomes, what do you do with the second komets? Because, of course, we have a pasuk that we've learned about in the past, Ki chol se'or v'chol dvash lo saktiru mimenu ishel Hashem. That mimenu ishel Hashem, that once you've burnt a murim, or in this case the komets, on the mizbeach, the shirayim, you can't burn, you're not allowed, lo saktiru. Mimenu ishel Hashem, once you burnt part of the emurim, the specified parts on the mizbeach, mimenu ishel Hashem, once you've burnt part of the korban on the mizbeach, in this case the komets, lo saktiru, you can't burn any other part of the korban. You can't burn any more of the shirayim. So if that's the case, what happens if he had in fact pledged 60 issarons, committed to 60 issarons? Well, if that's the case, then when he burns the first komets, the komets for his obligatory mincha, well then all of the remainder of the korban, of the mincha, are shirayim. You can't be burning any of that on the mizbeach. So how can he now go ahead and take the second komets and burn it on the mizbeach? That second komets is part of the shirayim in that case. It can't be burnt on the altar. So again, so if he burns the first kometz, how would he then be able to proceed to burn the second kometz? V'dilma kula chova he. What if the entire mincha, the entire contents of the bowl, all of the flour, all 60 issarons were what he had actually committed to? V'chol shehu mimenu leishim harei b'val taktir. And as I explained a minute ago, and as we've learned in the past, that once you burnt part of the korban on the mizbech, you can't be burning the shirayim on the mizbech. You wouldn't be able to now burn the second kometz of the nedava, out of concern that maybe all 60 were his obligation. Amr Reb Yehuda Reb Shimon ben Pazi demasik luhu l'shem eitzim. Says Reb Yehuda Reb Shimon ben Pazi, what you do is you burn the second kometz on the altar and you make a tanai. You say that if less than 60 issarons, in my example, if in fact it's 3 issarons or whatever the number is, but in my example, if it's less than 60 issarons, I've been giving that as an example, 3 issarons. So then, only 3 issarons were actually the obligation, and all the other 57 were a voluntary offering, and this kometz is for the remainder, is for the voluntary offering. And if, in fact, he had committed all 60 issarons, which means that this kometz is part of the shirayim, I'm not allowed to burn it on the altar, well then I'm not burning it as part of the korban, I'm burning it just as wood. As though I was mamish burning random wood on the altar, I'm burning this kometz as wood. He's going to burn this kometz as wood. And like Rabbi Eliezer, the sanya that we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Eliezer almost says, Rabbi Eliezer, l'reach nichoyach, iyata ma'ale, right? That the pasuk says, korban reish is takriv osam l'Hashem ve'al mizbeach lo yailu l'reach nichoyach. That the shirayim, from the previous pasuk of mimenu ishel Hashem, the shirayim cannot be burnt on the mizbeach as a reach nichoyach, as part of the korban, but they can be offered as wood. The reach nichoyach yatamayla, you can't burn the shirayim as a reach nichoyach, but aval tamayla shum eitzim, you can burn the shirayim as wood, just as though they were just wood. Okay, fine. So givaldig. So we had seen, according to Rabbah, that the machlokes between the Chacham and Rebbe is about, can you have one vessel that has in it both a chova and a nedava? Rebbe says you can't, and therefore you have to bring separate menachos. The Chacham say you can. So you could simply say whatever amount of this bowl, whatever amount of these issarons are meant to be for the obligation, they should be for the obligation. The rest should be a nidava. And in terms a voluntary offering. And in terms of what about if he did in fact commit to 60, then how does he burn the second kometz? Well, he'll make a condition and say if he should not be burning it, well then he's burning it simply as wood. Maybe once we've gotten here, well, the chuli alma mutter la'ariv chav b'nedav. You know what? Maybe Rebbe actually, in principle, agrees with the Chacham that you are allowed to burn chova. I'm sorry, you can have one vessel that has both an obligatory and voluntary offer mincha in it, and therefore it's no problem in principle to say that whatever amount is supposed to be the obligation will be the obligation, and the rest of the vessel will be the voluntary offering. Maybe where they disagree is simply this idea of, can you burn the shirayim as wood? That the Chacham are saying, yeah, you can burn it as wood, and therefore make that stipulation in case it's all 60 are my obligations, so in this I'm just burning as wood. Maybe Rebbe, where he disagrees, is that you can't make that stipulation, and therefore because you can't do that, you basically are stuck, because what if all 60 are meant to be burned? How are you going to burn the second kometz? I'm saying if all 60 are meant to be offered, how could you burn the second kometz? So maybe that's the sticking point, right? So Amalei Rav Acha, Brei Rav Ashi v'Dilma Tuchuli Alma mutter la'ariv chova b'nedava. Maybe Rebbe also agrees, yeah, you can have a chova and a nedava in the same vessel. Maybe they're just pashut arguing about Rebbe Eliezer, can you burn shirayim as wood? The Rabbanan islu, the Rebbe Eliezer, the Rebbe lays to the Rebbe Eliezer that the Rabbanan say, yeah, you can do that. That's the solution. Make the condition that just in case you need to, you're burning it as wood. And Rebbe says you can't do that, and therefore it's not a solution, and you just have to bring 60 individual minachos. Omar lay, so Rav Ashi says you can't say that would not work because isal kadaitech l'Rebbe mutul ariv chova b'nedava u'Reb Eliezer leislei. Because if that were the only sticking point about the wood part, you can solve for the wood part. After the ma'isi shisin b'chad mana umagalu v'kamitz. According to Rebbe, I can give you a different solution, right? If according to Rebbe, there was no problem with having the chova and nedava in the same vessel. If according to Rebbe, you could bring one vessel with 60 issarons and say, whatever amount I had committed to, that will be my obligation, and the rest will be voluntary. Now the question is, but you get stuck because while you can burn the obligatory komets, how are you going to burn the voluntary komets? What if all 60 were the obligation? You can't be burning this komets for the voluntary offering, for the nedava, and you can't say that it's wood. Yeah, but okay, how about this? Bring an additional issaron, bring an additional mincha, put an issaron in a separate bowl. Okay. Now, you'll scoop up a komets from the big bowl with the 60 issarons, and you'll say, if all 60 are for my obligation, if I had committed to all 60, well then this komets is for all 60. And when I take the second komets from the second bowl, that'll be for the issaron in the second bowl. And if I had committed to less than that, well then this komets will be for whatever I had committed to. The rest of the bowl will be for a nedava. And when I take a komets from the second bowl, that komets will be not just for the second bowl, but also for whatever is left in this big bowl that is my voluntary offering. And he'll then kind of touch the flour in the two bowls together so that they're kilu like one big unit, and that he's taking the issaron from either just from that, he's taking the komets either just from that issaron, if the entire other mincha, all 60 were the obligation. But if the rest of if only some of the 60, like for example, 3 issarons were the obligation, the rest of the 57 are a voluntary offering, well then he's going to touch the flour. When he touches the flour of both offerings together and he takes the komets from the second issaron, he has in mind that the komets should be not just for the second issaron, for that additional annexed issaron, but also for all the rest of the 60 issarons that are the voluntary part. And according to Rebbe, he doesn't have to burn anything as wood, and that would be a solution, according to Rebbe, that would avoid having to bring 1,830 issarons. You could just bring 61. However, from the fact that Rebbe doesn't give that solution, it must be that that isn't what he's arguing about. They aren't just arguing about whether you can burn it like wood or not. Rather, they are in fact arguing about, can you have one vessel that has both an obligation and a voluntary offering in the same vessel. Okay, so be'etzem, we've seen so far the explanation of Rav Chizda, who says that they're arguing about, can you have the obligation and chulin in the same vessel. We saw the opinion of Rabbah, who says that they're arguing about, can you have an obligation and a voluntary offering in the same vessel. Now, says Rave Omar, says Rave, the chulei alma mutter la'arev chova be'nedava. So says Rava, no, everyone agrees that you can, in fact, have one vessel that has both an obligatory and voluntary offering in it. That's fine. But the chulei alma islu Rebbe Eliezer, and also everybody agrees with Rebbe Eliezer that you can burn the shirayim as wood. So that's also not a problem. So what's the sticking point? V'achabeplukta Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, v'Rabbanan kemiflige, the machlekes is about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Shita that we had seen on Daf Peches. Titnan afilu mincha shel samich issarin no shein la samich log. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer afilu mincha shel shishim issarin ein lo ela loga shenemer le mincha velog shaman. That is a machlekes in the Mishnah on Daf Peches between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. When you have a mincha of multiple issarons, whether it's 3 issarons, whether it's 60 issarons, how much oil do you bring? According to the Chacham, if it's 3 issarons, you'll have 3 logs of oil. If it's 60 issarons, you'll have 60 logs of oil, right? The number of logs matches the number of issarons. That's according to the Chacham. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, 1 log of oil. 1 log of oil for 1 issaron, 1 log of oil for 3 issarons, 1 log of oil for 60 issarons. It's always 1 log of oil. So according to the Chachamim, easy peasy. You have 1 vessel with 60 issarons, and you say, whatever number I had committed to, so that number of issarons and that number of oil and that amount of oil, right? So let's say it was 3 issarons, so 3 issarons of flour and 3 logs of oil will be my obligatory mincha, and all the other 57 issarons and 57 logs of oil will be for the voluntary offering, mincha. Rebbe says, however, that you're always only going to have 1 log of oil. And if that is the case, that won't be enough for 2 separate minchas, right? Because basically, according to what we're saying, you have this 1 vessel that has 60 issarons in it, and we're then saying that this 1 vessel with 60 issarons in fact contains 2 separate minchas. One is an obligate, potentially, assuming that he didn't commit to 60 issarons. So let's say what in fact he committed to was 3 issarons. So you can have 1 obligatory mincha of 3 issarons and a voluntary mincha of 57 issarons in the same vessel. You're going to need 2 logs, and yet we only have 1 log. So Rabbanon safek Rabbanon, the rabbis hold, right? The rabbis who say 1 vessel with 60 issarons hold like the rabbis from Peches who say that you have 1 log of oil per issaron. Dami samich log who say that you'll be bringing 60 logs for the 60 issarons. V'chol chad v'chad issaron loga kashakil, and each issaron of flour has an associated log of oil. And if it's 3 issarons for the obligatory mincha, it will also have 3 logs of oil, and the rest of the 57 issarons will have 57 logs of oil. However, the Rebbe holds the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Damer ein lo ela luga, that you only bring 1 log of oil for all the 60, for the entire mincha. So v'lo yadinan ichada mincha hi desagila b'chad log, and yet we don't know, did he commit to 60 issarons, in which case it's all 1 mincha. And if it's all 1 mincha, all you need then is 1 log for all 60 issarons, id shtei menachos, or did he commit to a lower amount of issarons, maybe 3, in which case, shtei menachos nenu, there are 2 separate minchas in this vessel to be non shtei lugin. So each mincha is going to require its own log. So because we don't know how many logs to bring, we have to bring entirely separate minchas. Rav Ashi Omer, and finally, Rav Ashi says, there's a machlek. So the machlekes here is about if one commits to a smaller amount of issarons, can he bring more than he committed to? Can a person say, I'm going to bring 3 mincha of 3 issarons, and then end up bringing a mincha of 60 issarons? Can we say, wow, that's very gracious of you, great? Or do we say, wait, that's way too much, you got to take away 57? Do you have to bring exactly what you committed to, or can you bring more? The Rabbanan say, wow, that sounds amazing. Sure, if he had committed in fact to 3, but he brought 60, that's great, and that's completely kosher. Rebbe Sava, whereas Rebbe holds low yotza, whereas Rebbe says, no, you can't do that. If you committed to 3, you have to bring 3. You can't bring 60. But they already argue about it. This is going to be, I think, on tomorrow's daf. the Tanan that we learn on tomorrow's daf, Ko'in Vevi Gadol, that if he says, I'm going to bring a small cow, and he brings a big cow, Yotza, the Tanakama says, Yotza, that's fine. He said he can bring a small cow, he brought a big cow, that's fine. Rebbe Amar Lo Yotza. Rebbe says you are not Yotze. So why do we have to argue about this twice? Why do we have to say, by a mincha, if you say 3 issarons, you can't bring 60 issarons? And also by a cow, if you say a small cow, you can't bring a big cow. Why argue about the same thing twice? Tzricha, I'll tell you why we need both. If we only had the case of the menachos, maybe by menachos, the rabbis say that if you said you're going to bring 3 issarons and you brought 60 issarons, the rabbis say by a mincha that's fine because the kometz is the same. Whether you bring 1 issaron, 3 esronos, 60 esronos, the kometz is the same. But by the cows, the emurim of a cow are going to be a lot more voluminous, if that's a word, for a large cow than a small cow. A small cow has less chelev and yoseres kaved and all that stuff. There's going to be much less volume of emurin for a small cow than there will be for a big cow. So it actually makes a big difference between big and small. By a cow, it doesn't make any difference between big and small by a mincha in terms of what's burnt in the mizbeach. So maybe here, by the mincha, the rabbis say you could bring a big mincha even when you commit a smaller one, but maybe by the cow, they would say, if you say a small cow, you got to bring a small cow because there's a big difference in terms of the emurim between the two. But over there, the nefisha emurim, where there's a lot more emurim for a big cow, maybe they'll agree with Rebbe that you have to stick to your commitment. And all Fiad was the cows, Rebbe, maybe that's where Rebbe says you have to stick to your commitment because there's a big difference in practice for emurim. But by the menachos, where either way it's the same kometz, right? 1 kometz for the entire mincha, maybe they would agree with the rabbis that you would be yotze that you can have a bigger mincha, tzricha, therefore they need to argue in both places, and therefore the machlokas here is about, if you say you're going to bring a smaller mincha, can you bring a bigger one? The rabbis say sure, the Rebbes say, Rebbe says, no, you can't. Get valdig. Let's move on to the next Mishnah. We will review the different shitas at the end. And now we get up to a new Mishnah. If a fellow says, I am going to bring eitzim. Now it's very interesting. It seems that this is literally a korban of wood. So it seems we're not talking about a person says, I want to donate wood for the mizbeach. I want to sponsor the wood for the day for the mizbeach. That's not what it is. He's not donating wood to be put in some storage house so that, some storage room so that when they need wood, there's wood available. No, he's mamish bringing a korban of wood. Just like you could bring a sheep or a cow or flour, you could literally bring a korban of wood. That's what it seems. I mean, we haven't really talked about wood korbans much. But anyways, person says, I'm going to bring a korban of wood. You got to bring at least 2 hunks of wood. That'll be your korban. Interesting. Levona leifchos mikometz. If a person says, I'm going to donate levona, you got to bring at least a fistful, at least a kometz of levona. Now, chamisha kmatzim, there were 5 kometzes. Ha'omer are olai levona leifchos mikometz. A person says, I'm going to bring levona, frankincense. He's got to bring at least a kometz of frankincense. Hamanadeb mincha. Person says, I'm going to bring a korban mincha. Yavi ima kometz levona. He brings with it a kometz of frankincense. Hamayla esa kometz bachutz. Chayav. Wow, mamish, bringing back sugyas from the end of Masechta Zvachim. That was a very difficult sugya, spanned over 2 prakim. Hamayla bachutz, hashoichet bachutz. Very difficult sugya. Anyways, if a person burns a kometz of a mincha outside of the azara, he's chayav karis. Shnei bazichin, tunin shnei kmatzin, and in each of the 2 baziche levona on the shulchan was a kometz of frankincense. Hari olai zov. A person says, I am going to donate gold to the holy temple, lo yifchos midinar zav, he needs to bring at least 1 golden dinar of gold. 1 golden dinar, I believe, is 25 silver dinars. Kesef, if he says, I'm going to bring kesef and donate kesef to the holy temple, lo yifchos midinar kesef, you got to bring at least 1 dinar, 1 silver dinar, which I believe is the zuz that we talk about when we talk about zuz. That's this dinar. Nechoshes, if he says, I'm going to bring copper, lo yifchos mi ma'a kesef, bring no less than a ma'a of silver. Bring no less than the value of a ma'a of silver. A ma'a is 1/6 of a silver dinar. Peirashi v'nudea ma peirashi, if he says that I said I was going to bring gold or silver or whatever, but I don't remember how much I had said, hey, maybe ad sheyomer lo l'chach niskavanti, so then he brings enough so that, what is it? Perashti kach v'kach zav. Yeah, exactly. So he says, I'm going to bring gold, but he doesn't remember how much. So he's got to bring enough gold until it gets to the point where he's like, okay, this is, I would never have had this in mind. Right? He says, I can't remember if I brought, I don't know, so let's say it's dollars, okay? That's something that's more relatable. He says, I can't remember, did I say $18? Did I say $180? Did I say $1,800? I don't know. I definitely didn't say $18,000, right? So when he gets to the point where it's like, okay, right, so maybe it was $1,800, I don't know, but then it gets to maybe, I don't know, $10,000, like, okay, this I didn't, that's too much. I did not donate $10,000, right? So if he says, so if he doesn't remember how, so he says, I donated gold, but I don't remember how much, so then he basically donates until he says, okay, this is too much. I would not have donated that amount. Tana Rabbana, the rabbi says the Gemara, Korban, Melamed Shemisnadvin, Eitzim. So this is a pasuk by the Korban Mincha. It says, V'nefesh kisakriv Korban Mincha LaHashem, and we learn out from the word Korban, Shemisnadvin Eitzim, that you can even make a wood Korban. You can donate a wood Korban. Just literally donate wood. That's offer wood, a wood offering. V'chama, how much wood is in a wood offering? Shnei gzirin, 2 hunks. V'cheinu omer, and similarly, there's a pasuk in Sefer Nehemiah that says, V'ageirole sipalnu al korban ha'etzim, and we drew lots to. So in this case, the korban eitzim is referring to stocking the Beis Hamikdash with wood. But we see, so basically, it describes in Sefer Nehemiah that all the Yidden that were in Eretz Yisrael signed a pact, and I believe they signed it, but they committed, they accepted upon themselves that they were going to keep Shabbos, and that they were going to Trumas and Meisus and keep mitzvahs. And they also wrote here that they had committed to stocking the temple with wood, and it calls it korban ha'etzim. Gorelos v'julat sipanu al korban ha'etzim, for this korban ha'etzim. So we see that wood is referred to as a korban and can be offered in the Beis Hamikdash, a wood offering. Rabbi Omer says, Rabbi says it's mamish like a mincha. Eitzim korbanim tunin melach. You need to put salt in them. I'll call korbancha takriv melach v'tunin agosher. You got to bring it, right? Just like by mincha, there's a agosher. You bring it to the marav is dromis. On my rav l'divrei Rabbi, it says Rav according to Rabbi, eitzim tunin kmitza. You'd have to break, the wood into small pieces and take a kometz. You don't just burn the wood offering. You burn the wood offering on wood, right? Kilu, just like if you were burning a mincha or you were burning an animal, you would put it on a wooden pyre. The wood offering is no different. You burn it on a wooden pyre. You don't just light the wood offering on fire. There's a fire on the mizbeach, and you burn the wood offering on the existing fire, on the pyre of the altar. If a person says, I'm going to bring frankincense, you bring no less than a kometz. And how do we know this? The pasuk says, "Veherim mimenu bekumtzo," that you'll take a kometz, misoles hamincha umishamna ve'eis kol halevona. Bakish levona le harama de mincha. We juxtapose the levona, the frankincense, to what is taken from the mincha, aroma de mincha kometz, haf levona nami kometz. Just like what is taken from the mincha is a kometz, so also the levona is a kometz. So the rabbis Tad arei olai lamizbeach. If a person says, I'm going to offer something on the mizbeach, what? Yavi levona, bring frankincense. She'ein l'cha davar shekarev kula legab mizbeach ela levona. Because what is the only thing that is entirely burnt on the levona, on the mizbeach? Frankincense. We're going to clarify that in a minute. But what is entirely burnt on the mizbeach? Frankincense. Perashti ben Yudea ma Perashti, if he says that I had donated something to the mizbeach, I don't know what it is, but I definitely donated something, but something specific, I don't remember what it is. Yavi mikol davar shekarev lemizbeach, bring from everything that is carved lemizbeach, and what that includes is, sure, it could be frankincense. You should, right? Again, he says that I offered something specific for the mizbeach. So, what did you offer? What is that specific thing you offered for the mizbeach? Well, it could be frankincense, which we just said is burnt entirely in the mizbeach. Another possibility is it could be it could be ola sa'of. Ola sa'of is pretty much burnt entirely on the mizbeach. It could be maybe minchas nesachim, which is burnt entirely on the mizbeach. So you would have to bring each of those. Now, visu leka ve'ika, we had said a minute ago that if he says, I'm going to donate something to the mizbeach, so what does he bring? He brings levona, because that is entirely burnt in the mizbeach. What does it mean, only that is entirely burnt in the mizbeach? Va'ika ola. Olas are entirely burnt in the mizbeach, are they not? Ika ora, the kohanim. Yeah, but the hide isn't. The hide goes to the kohanim. Va'ika ola sa'of. What about ola sa'of? Is that not entirely burnt on the mizbeach? Ika mur of notza. Well, the crop, which is like part of the digestive tract, and the feathers are not burnt on the mizbeach. Rather, they are placed, or I think even technically thrown, on the eastern part of the kevesh, the same place where the Trumas Hadeshin is placed, and also when they clean out the menorah and the mizbach hakatoras, all of that stuff goes to the east of the kevesh. So therefore, they aren't burnt. They are not burnt. Those parts are actually not burnt on the mizbeach. The rest of the ola sa'of, yes. Nesachim. What about nesachim? You take the wine, you pour it into the shisin. Well, yeah, exactly. The shisin, I'll say, they're not burnt on the mizbeach. They are poured down the shisin. Minchas nesachim. What about minchas nesachim? You bring a korban. With that korban is a flour offering. That flour offering is entirely burnt. There's no komets or anything. Came into ika mincha da achli kreanim mina lo psikale. Sure, you're right. Minchas nesachim is entirely burnt on the mizbeach, but because there are plenty of other menachos that are not entirely burnt on the mizbeach, so to kind of like treat a mincha as something that's entirely burnt on the mizbeach wouldn't be entirely true, since it's only true for some menachos. Okay, so therefore we consider levona to be the only thing that is purely and undebatedly entirely burnt on the mizbeach. If a person commits to bringing gold, he should bring no less than 1 dinar of gold. Naska, maybe it's an ingot. Remember Abba's ingot? In chotfi v'didi chotfi? He says, I'm going to bring a coin of gold. Viduma prite, maybe prutas of gold. Papa prite to die below. The inches says Papa, they don't make prutas of gold. Kasev leifchas midinar. Silver should be no less than 1 dinar. Viduma naska, maybe an ingot of silver. Says I can bring a coin. Viduma prite, maybe it means prutas of silver. Amr of sheshes ba'asa losagu prite de kasba. Well, it's a place where they don't use silver prutas. Nechoshes lo yifchos mima kesef. If he says I'm going to bring copper, don't bring any less than 1/6 of a dinar's worth of silver. Don't bring that equivalent of copper. Tanya Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov says Reb Yaakov lo yivchos mitzinora ktana. Don't bring any less than a small fork shonachoshes of copper. Lemay chazir. What is a small fork of copper good for? Rabbi says Rabbi shemachatnim ba psilos mekanchin ba neros. They use it to take the burnt part off of the wicks and to clean out the neris. Tosfos points out it is not talking about the menorah. The menorah had its own tweezers for that. Rather, it's talking about the different candles and the different light fixtures that they had in the Beis Hamikdash. Barzel, if one commits iron to the Beis Hamikdash. Tanya, we learn in Beis Acherim Omrim lo yifchos mi kalya orev, no less iron than would be appropriate for the kalya orev. The kalya orev was these pointy things that were on the roof of the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodashim that would keep the birds away, so that you don't want any birds flying over the Beis Hamikdash, and they would go to the bathroom or whatever. We want to keep away birds from the Beis Hamikdash. So they had these very sharp things to keep them away. That was called the Kalya Orev. Tosfos Taka points out that was really only for the second temple, because the first temple there was the Shechina, and the Shechina kept away the birds. Bechama Omer, Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, Amma al Amma, that a Kalya Orev is 1 amma by 1 amma's worth of, we're talking about 1 amma by 1 amma's worth of iron. Those who say, Lo yifchos mi amma al amma, there shouldn't be any less than an amma by an amma. L'may chazio, what is an amma by an amma good for? Rav Yosef l'Kalya Orev, for this Kalya Orev to keep away the birds. Friends, that was Daf Kuf Vav of Masechta Menachos. On Daf Kuf Vav of Masechta Menachos, we learned about why minchas nesachim is excluded from the safek. Okay, that was very quick at the beginning. I have it on the list just because it's technically the first thing we talked about. But yeah, there were all sorts of reasons why, when you're not sure which mincha you committed to, it is either minchas solas, machvas, marcheshes, ma'fesoner, chalas, rikikin, not a minchas nesachim. There are all sorts of reasons. They're not, minchas nesachim is not brought on its own. It is also brought communal. There's no comments, etc. Next, when a number of issarons is specified for a vessel. 1 second, I just need to fix something. Okay, transparent and white. Okay, great. So now, when a number of issarons is specified for a vessel, so there's a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rebbe. The Chachamim said, this was the big discussion of today's daf. The Chachamim said that you bring one vessel with 60 issarons in it. Rebbe says you bring 60 vessels, each vessel containing one more issaron than the previous vessel, starting with 1 and ending with 60. We saw 4 reasons for their machlokas. The first rationale was that the Chacham say that one vessel could contain both a mincha as well as chulin. Rebbe says it can't, therefore you need separate vessels. That was Rav Chizda. Rabbah says that the machlokas is, can one vessel contain both a chova and a nivdava? The rabbi said yes, and Rebbe said no, one vessel cannot contain a chova and a nidava, therefore you have to bring separate vessels. That led to a discussion about how exactly does the komets work, because once you take the komets from the obligation, what if all 60 were really your obligation? How could you burn the second komets? So we said either because you could just treat it as wood, or there were other solutions that were discussed. Another possibility was the possibility of Rava, that the machlokas was about, what did Rava say? Rava said, that the machlokas between the Chacham and Rebbe was about Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov's shita, right? That when it comes to a mincha of 60 issarons, do you need 60 loaves of oil, or is 1 log of oil enough? According to the rabbis, you have 60 loaves of oil. So to say that, let's say, 3 issarons would be the obligation, so 3 issarons with 3 loaves of oil, and the other 57 issarons with the other 57 loaves of oil would be the voluntary offering, and that's fine. Rebbe said, no, it's like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, that you have only 1 log of oil, and therefore, if you have 1 obligatory and 1 voluntary offering, you're going to need 2 loaves of oil, but you don't know that because maybe all 60 is for the obligation, and all you need is 1 log. So therefore, he says you have to bring separate vessels. And finally, we saw the opinion of, I believe it was Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi would say that the machlekes is about, if you say you're going to bring a smaller mincha and then you bring a larger mincha, is that okay? The rabbi said it's fine. You said you're going to bring 3, let's say, now you're bringing 60 because you're not sure what you said. That's great. According to Rebbe, he would say that you can't do that. If you said 3, you got to bring 3. Oh, and then we got to a new Mishnah about donating wood, frankincense, and metals. And if you commit those, how much do you have to bring? What are the minimum amounts? Friends, that was Daf Kuvav, Daf 106 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. I will catch you tomorrow. Have a great day.